The Mafia has always been portrayed as an organized crime syndicate of which members are expected to live by its laws or suffer the consequences. But sometimes these same mafiosos have turned against their own. From FBI informants to double agents, here are the top 7 Mafia betrayals that changed everything. Number 7. The death of Joseph Andrew Messino was the first Mafia captain in modern history to cooperate with federal authorities against his own people. This was after he was convicted for racketeering and extortion. While awaiting sentencing in a Florida prison, he met with FBI officials and began providing them with information about the Bonanno crime family that he was a part of. Even though this went on 4 years before the FBI decided to cut him loose and let him go free with a reduced sentence. They did so to prevent any other mafiosos from turning rat, which they feared would bring a wave of death and violence. However, this proved to be a bad decision because soon after his release, he left the witness protection program and returned to New York, where he began living under the false name of Carl. It didn't take long for his old associates to find him, and he was eventually found murdered in his Staten Island home, shot 3 times in the head. No. 6. Nicky Barnes, also known as Mr. Icepick. Nicky Barnes had earned his nickname during the 80s when he went on a cocaine-fueled crime spree that included several murders. In one instance, he and his accomplices kidnapped, tortured, and then murdered a drug dealer named Jimmy Mc. He was also involved in the murder of a rival drug dealer named Henry Lee Hill, whose body was later found stuffed inside a metal drum filled with concrete. In fact, his arrest in 1986 was directly related to the Hill murder, leading to his 20-year prison sentence. However, while serving that time, Barnes became a government witness in the case against his former associates and revealed the location of Hill's missing money, which had been buried in a backyard. He also testified in over 40 other cases involving mobsters from various families. After being released from prison in 2007, he continued working with the FBI until his death in 2020. Number 5. The Lufthansa heist. The Lufthansa heist is considered to be the largest in aviation history, with the total amount stolen being around $6 million, which would be over $8.5 million today. The robbery took place in December 1978 at the Lufthansa cargo building at JFK International Airport. A group of thieves who were connected to the Mafia made off with the cash, jewelry, and other valuables. And although they were never caught, it's believed that a large chunk of the loot was taken by a man named Jimmy Burke, who was a member of the Lucchese crime family. His crew chief, a hitman named Henry Hill, actually testified against him and several others during the trials that followed. But after making the deal with the feds, it didn't take long for Burke and company to realize that Hill had betrayed them. So much so that when Burke was sentenced to 7 years in prison, he vowed revenge. As soon as he was released, he tracked down Hill, who was living in the witness protection program under a false identity. Although the FBI protected Hill for some time, Burke and his 2 accomplices managed to track him down and beat him badly, leaving him hospitalized with permanent brain damage. Burke was later arrested and served the remainder of his sentence behind bars. Meanwhile, Hill continued to cooperate with the FBI until 1980, when he realized that he could make more money dealing drugs than working a legitimate job. And so he returned to his life of crime, only to be busted again in 1987. Number 4. Salvatore Vitelli. During the early days of the Cold War, the United States was desperate to get its hands on Soviet military secrets, and one of the ways it tried to do so was through a program called Operation PBS Star. It involved a network of spies within the Soviet Union, one of whom was a man named Rudolf Abel. When Abel was captured and brought back to the U.S. in 1957, President Eisenhower wanted to use him as leverage to swap for an American spy. The problem was no one knew that the U.S. had any spies in the USSR. That all changed when a man named Salvatore Vitelli approached the FBI, claiming to be an agent working for the Italian government. He provided the FBI with intelligence regarding Soviet activities and even allowed them to bug his apartment. Then when Abel was exchanged for a Russian spy named William Fisher in 1960, Vitelli received $300,000 from the CIA for his assistance. It was NT until 2010 that S. daughter revealed that her father was actually an American informant who had infiltrated the Genovese crime family. She also confirmed that he had been paid by both the FBI and the CIA throughout the 60s, during which time he provided valuable information that helped put many mobsters behind bars. Number 3. The Vario crime family. In the mid-1980s, the Vario crime family was one of the most powerful in the country, controlling illegal gambling, drug dealing, and union racket activities. But it was also one of the most corrupt. Its members routinely bribed politicians and law enforcement officers, and even had several of their own on the payroll. This included a man named Anthony Senta, who was a New York State Supreme Court justice. In fact, it was the FBI's investigation into Senta that led to the uncovering of a massive conspiracy that reached the highest levels of the Mafia. What followed was one of the largest and most successful takedowns of the Mafia in history. Over the course of 10 months, the FBI arrested 84 mobsters, including Boss Paul Ver, Underboss Anthony Fat Tony Salerno, Underboss Joseph Massino, and Consigliere Anthony Casso. All told, the government secured 63 convictions and 50 mobsters pleaded guilty. Number 2. Michael Francesi. In 2004, Michael Francesi was sentenced to 6 years in prison after being convicted of racketeering and extortion. However, just a year into his sentence, he was transferred to a federal prison in North Carolina and soon after entered the Witness Protection Program. It was there that he began cooperating with the FBI against his former associates in the Genovese crime family. By 2009, he had provided information that resulted in over 24 arrests. He was then moved to an undisclosed location where he continued his work as a confidential informant. But it didn't last long because soon after he was moved, Francesi was arrested in connection with a $1 million armored car robbery. He claimed that he had been set up by his former boss, Genovese crime family captain Labrado Valle, but refused to cooperate with the government in the case. Instead, he hired a high-profile attorney named Robert H. Barnes and proclaimed his innocence. The charges against him were eventually dropped, but not before causing him to lose his status as a confidential informant. No. 1. Henry Hill. Henry Hill is probably the most famous mafia turncoat of all time. The story of his life was what the 1990 movie Goodfellas was based on. In the early days of his career, Hill worked alongside James Conway and Thomas DeC to run illegal gambling operations that catered to police officers and firefighters. However, as his career progressed, he began selling drugs to help make ends meet. This enraged his bosses, who ordered him to choose between either continuing to work for them or going to prison for what he'd done. Choosing the former, Hill began working as an informer for the FBI and helped them dismantle several mafia families. He was eventually sentenced to 10 years in prison for his crimes, but only served 4 before being released on parole. He then spent the next several years hiding out in the Witness Protection Program while continuing to work with the FBI. But in 1980, he was arrested again for returning to his old habits of selling drugs. He served 5 years in prison and was released in 1985, after which time he wrote a tell-all book that exposed the inner workings of the Mafia. Who do you think had the biggest impact? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Be sure to check out our other videos, and we'll see you in the next one.